Welcome back, listeners. In today's episode focused on sales careers, we have a special returning guest, Hirak Mukherjee. You might remember Hirak from our earlier episode on entrepreneurship. He has over 30 years of experience, including senior leadership roles at global companies like IBM. Hirak has led high performance sales teams and driven impactful business growth. And that is one of the many reasons we're excited to dive into his insights on building a successful sales career. Today, we'll spend some time with Hirak and learn some very little known facets and some very interesting techniques and concepts that any young salesperson can use in their careers. Hi, Hirak. Good afternoon, and it's nice to be back again with you. The last time we had a very interesting conversation where you were opening up so many facets on entrepreneurship. And for the sake of our listeners, if I may remind them that apart from being an entrepreneurial expert, an advisor, and investor, you also share something with me in that we are both, hardcore guys from the sales side of life, and we began our careers probably in that space, and you continue to use the word sales, which I am consciously using quotes as our strong point. And I remember you telling me the other day, uh, our voice and our talking is really our our weapon. So jokes apart, I just wanted to introduce that uh, having worked in technology sales with your background in IBM and other leading global corporations, you had a ringside view of the most complex and I would say the most advanced form uh, of selling. And we can define selling here as convincing somebody to buy a product or service in that sense, and completing and executing it, and then following it post the purchase as well. So there's a cycle that starts at the pre-sales and goes on all the way to installing and using the product, and you're part of that journey. Uh, Often people think that it's just that one interaction and not the rest. So the whole cycle is where you've been part of. So A, you've been part of a very complex and most advanced multi-million dollar products. They're also mission critical products. The sale has to lead to outcomes that cannot fail for the client. Uh, and you have competitors, and you have operated at the highest price point probably as the market leader and the most advanced player. So there's so many things that are the perfect storm for a nervous young salesperson. How do I do all this, right? So when you entered your career, what were the uh, apprehensions you had, and how did you could you narrate them if there were any? Because your journey may be a nice way to talk to you about this.
Sure, and thank you very much for having me back here. And by the way, India and New Zealand test series is going on. India is not doing well at all. Looks like we're going to lose the second test as well. So that's not a good start. But going back to the start of my career, which is many, many, many years back, more than 3 decades back, and those were seriously different times, of course. But having said that, there was another very interesting parameter to a sales career back then, when unlike today, or for this matter, for the last quite a few years, sales wasn't the most interesting career back then. It it did not have the glamour associated with it. Remember, we are talking pre-liberalization days in India. And I started in 1990. Pre-liberalization, you didn't have the MNCs here, and the career and everything else was kind of within the melting pot of many other uh, aspects, sales not necessarily being one of the top areas. So that's the background. So So there obviously used to be aspersions cast. Uh, it's like saying that, all right, you can't do anything else, so why not try sales? So that's how it started. Having said that, it was always very interesting because one of my key, even keys or takeaways was that I like going and meeting people. I like meeting new people. Uh, I'm not so much of a desk person. I like roaming around. I like traveling, etc., etc. And then that's what interested me in this profession. At the same time, I joined the technology industry. Back then, this was a sunrise industry in 1990. Uh, and therefore, it was very, very obvious. And given my background in pure science and math, this was a choice that I could have made, and I did. Obviously, it was nice, it was challenging, it was paying, and it gave me a lot. And honestly speaking, if I were to look back and see how it turned out, it's not just about the career. It did a lot of character building as well. You travel to places, you meet different people, you need to size them up uh, from a positive perspective within a very short span of time, assess them, try and do what you need to do about your products with them, etc. So all of those things worked a lot for me, and in later years, especially now in the last so many years, when I started doing different things, especially in the consulting side or the entrepreneurship side, all of that experience really, really worked well for me. Having said that, let's break this up into parts, which is when we say sales, and it has many cycles, I understand, but there are two broad pillars within it, you know, and one part is business development and the other part is sales. Okay. And all of that we probably put under one single umbrella called sales. Uh, there are completely different aspects and attributes to each of these pillars. Okay. And it may work well for us to discuss these pillars separately and see what people need to do in these pillars and how are they different and what impact do they have on people's career and what demands they put on people, especially a young guy still coming into this profession to be successful. So that's how I would start.
Okay. So, like you said, you started with the fact that the times that you began your sales with are very different from the times now. So it may not probably be appropriate for us to measure the degree of difficulty then and or the challenges then and now. So if we were to hypothesize, or if since you work with younger team members and so on, what do you see now? I will come back to this interesting differential you made about business development and sales. I think that's one hook where a lot of value can be obtained. But coming back to this whole nervous beginnings or tentative beginnings in the consultative technology sales process, which is what we are or B2B sales here. What do you think younger people are being faced with as a challenge today, from what you see, or
First thing
any aspect of that?
The first thing that I see is a sense of being overwhelmed, primarily because if you're in a very serious B2B institutional sales kind of an environment, and interestingly, it's not just limited to technology sales, it could be technology, it could be engineering products, it could be finance industry. Remember, the finance industry, the banking industry, they have very serious institutional sales teams. Investment banking, advisory work is mainly institutional sales. A lot of people think that
All of it, yeah.
investment banking is a lot about analysis and crunching and all that.
Yeah.
It's actually a sales job and institutional sales. But in each of these, and all of them, you are necessarily required to interact with very senior executives. Okay. So there is firstly a sense of being overwhelmed. That look, I'm just a young rookie kid of the block, and here's a guy sitting right across the table, 30 years in the industry. He knows it all. So that's the second issue. One is the overwhelming feeling for the situation, and the second is this perception that the man on the other side knows it all. 30 years, 35 years, maybe more in the industry, so they know it all. And I don't. So, how do I stand up to his expectations? Right. So, that's the second challenge that comes in. The third challenge that comes in is awareness of my situation. And it's not a esoteric or a philosophical comment. My situation means what am I representing? Who am I representing? What is the product or service? What does it really do? What value does it really add? And pretty much everybody goes through these different sales schools and training, in-house trainings and external trainings, and they all talk about value. But what somebody needs to understand is it's not gross value, it's net value. What does it mean? Gross value is, let's say you're selling a piece of mobile phone. Really institutional, but just to take an example, selling a piece of mobile phone. So what's the gross value? Of course, it's a mobile phone. You can call anywhere, you can message, you can do WhatsApp, you can check social media. So that's the gross value. But that's not a reason why someone is going to buy from you. Someone is going to buy from you based on the net value, which is what is your product giving as a net over and above all the other products. Right? And that's true for every product, every service. It's the net value. And that's a very, very big distinction no sales school will teach you, or no sales school does teach you. That look, what's the difference between gross value and net value, and why net value is so important. And that's where most sales teams falter. They're not able to establish that my value over and above my competitor is X, and I can monetize that to a Y value in dollars stroke rupee. That's the fourth challenge. That look, how do you commercialize or monetize the value that you're promising to a dollar value? All right. And you can think of many different things. And the most common thing to talk about, especially in technology sales, is productivity gains. All right. And then you are always brought back to the fact that, at least here in India, we are a nation with a lot of surplus labor, right? So how much productivity gains will you gain by cutting those costs? So that's the fourth challenge. So these are some of those challenges. Being overwhelmed by the fact that you're meeting someone very senior. Uh, the second one is that uh, you think your perception is that person across the table knows it all, you don't. Third is your own self-awareness of the situation, and fourth is your which is to do with gross versus net value, and the fourth is your ability, rather your inability, to convert that net value into a dollar number. So that's what I would consider.
So again, I act as a learner here, and I'll sort of recap what you said so that I understood it. The two big things that you talked about. One is you talked about the axis of what I call being overwhelmed. So you're overwhelmed, and from that axis, you're overwhelmed by the situation, you're overwhelmed by the seniority and experience and the magnificence of your counterparts who are the buyers. And you're also overwhelmed by your own self because you're overwhelmed by simply the complexity of what you have as a product and how you bring it out. So overwhelm seems to be like an axis. The other axis seems to be the ability to understand and sell the value proposition of the product, where you talked about gross and net, and it's really the net value that you're looking at. Can I ask you a couple of more questions about net value? Uh, in a very simplistic way, I may confuse it for USP. What is the USP of your product? Everybody's got the same functionalities. What is your USP? So in a simplistic way, I may misunderstand it as USP, but if I were to not, then could you reiterate that net value, if possible, with an example?
Again, mobile phones. So, you let's say the two big ecosystems, Apple iPhones, Android. All right. You obviously have a lot many Android phones and an Apple iPhone. An Apple iPhone is usually more expensive when compared to similar likewise models. So what's your net value? Net value to an Apple iPhone user? Why is it that an Apple iPhone user sticks to an Apple iPhone, keeps buying new phones, and every time a new product is launched, you find people standing in huge long queues overnight to
Yeah.
buy it? It's the ease of use. It's the
Yeah.
use of use, the interactiveness, the intuitive designing, the fluidity of the designing, and the fact that things work without me having to worry too much about what's going on. That's the net value over and above most Android phones, where of course they are intuitive, they are the design elements are nice, but when you compare, arguably, and that these are the reasons why people choose Apple, the Apple products seem to score over the Android. So that's the net value. If you say that, look, I have a haptic touch screen. Yeah, of course, that's the gross value. Everybody has haptic touch screen, right? Now the question is that is it very fluid? Uh,
Yeah.
the answer with
Or
Apple
does
is
it
yes, it's
work?
very fluid.
Or will it work without hanging or failing every time? So
Yes, net value for let's say the AirPod stuff. Uh, they have a feature. Look, you're listening to music and you turn your head, and then volume in one side comes down. Why? Because Apple has figured out that if you're suddenly turning your head, it could probably be because someone is trying to call you, and you might want to have a conversation, and therefore this. So
intuitive
that's
design.
net.
Yeah,
That's net value, right?
absolutely. Got it.
So that's what needs to be done for every product. Uh, and I took a very basic product, which is a mobile phone. I'm calling it a very basic product. It's a complex product, but I'm calling it very basic because pretty much everybody has a mobile phone. Everybody has a
Mhm.
smartphone. Everybody
Correct.
has middle end to high
Correct.
end smartphone. So
Correct.
it's a easy example to understand what is gross versus net value.
Okay, now coming back again, where you wear both hats, as imagining how you were as a young professional and imagining yourself as a vice president or director, having played both the roles. Uh, if if I'm the young professional, do I expect that my company will explain this to me with great clarity? Uh, I may be working in an organization where the pre-sales or the sales collateral may not, or the training may not provide me with that value. So if I'm on my own, how would you suggest I solve that problem? If I've been given the tools, then it's easy. I just have to follow the model. But if I'm not, do you have any suggestions for me again as a young salesperson?
And this is where it's unfortunate because in the name of trainings and in the name of education content, I don't think the training imparted is very effective on the art side of it. Sales is art and science. The science side of it is, I think, very well covered. Uh, Explanation of products, what does a product do, its feature, benefit, gross value, all of that is very well explained, very well understood, or at least attempted to be understood, but not the art side. But as you said, a young sales guy walks into the room of a gentleman who's 35 years into the industry. How does he behave? Is it an adult psychology? Is it an adult child psychology? How do you position it? I remember the first time I walked out of my office and walked in was a very similar situation. I was a 20-year-old kid, and I walk into the chamber of the general manager of the coal conglomerate in India, which is Coal India Limited. So, and 35 years back, Coal India Limited was one of the largest, it was one of the top five big companies in India, right? It still is a very, very large company. At that point in time, it was one of the top five companies, Coal India and Steel Authority, etc.
At least from a
And the
demand
general
point of view for buying high tech products, there would have been very few like this. So,
one, there were very few like this. Two is, I mean, imagine today if you're walking in to meet the executive director chairman of Reliance Industries. Reliance is
correct.
one of the biggest companies in India. Coal India was like that.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you're walking in to meet the chief general manager who has more than 35 years of experience. He's a PhD holder,
Right.
and he knows pretty much everything about everything that can be known. And you
Yeah.
walk in and you start a conversation with him, and I still remember he tells me that okay, you can write down a few things that I'm telling you. These are some specs, and I realized that I didn't have a pen. And he took
Okay.
his pen out and gave it to me and said, since this is the first time you've come to meet somebody, treat it as a gift from me. So that's how it started, and it melted. Of course, they became a big, big client of mine. But these things happen, all right? And you are really not well taught, and this is the art part of it. You're really not very well taught
Yeah.
how to handle these situations. It's a skill that when you walk into someone's room, you assess that person and decide whether you're going to play an adult psychology,
Right.
where you position yourself as an adult. I am not a
Right.
kid. I
Yeah.
can match up to your expectations and your intellectual bandwidth. Or you play an adult child psychology, which says that, okay, I'm like your children and I'm like your student if you are a professor, and you know, I surrender, you teach me. So these are some of the things which people need to pick up. Unfortunately, it's the job that companies do is not really very well. It's a very hard skill training, not those soft skill trainings.
Thank you for, in fact, bringing this out because in another session with another expert and friend, Ayaz, we're going to be talking about behavioral selling and really about reading the room, looking at the disc profiling, and understanding it intuitively and so on. So lovely that you have endorsed it in this point. But I still want to come back to a point which actually I'm trying to learn also here is when we talk about the gross and net value. It may so be that my company has not provided me with the net value proposition of the product or the service so well. So, how do I make that up on my own? Is there a way for me to cover up that gap?
Sure. So that would require the salesperson to have a bit of a research mindset, which I very, very, very strongly recommend that every salesperson throughout their career, from the first day of their career to whichever day they want to continue to, that they continue to have this mindset. There are many advantages of it. If time permits, we'll talk about it. But let me explain the context for what I just said. So, if the company has not been able to precisely communicate the net value, what does a salesperson do? The first things is that once he is out in the market and he visits clients and he talks to them, he faces competition, very important for him to face competition. After a few months, he or she would be adequately experienced about what's in the offering in the ecosystem, and that's when they will have to do this research saying that, all right, here's what the competition is offering, here's what our offering is, and do a very unbiased and a detached analysis. All right, it's what I call the dance floor versus the gallery. You've got to move away from the dance floor to the gallery on top, and then look down on the dance floor and see all the dancers and analyze all their dance performance and figure out that what is it that I need to do to establish my net value. All right. So once they get to see what the competitive offering is, and then they have a clear, deeper understanding of their own offering. If they lack in this, they can always go back to their own company, and that's a good job, which most companies do. They keep giving them enough information. Enough information is available on company intranets and websites, etc., etc. So they do this, and that's when, in their mind, in their own way, they start building the net value. And it may sound very complicated and complex and overwhelming, but it is not, because as humans, we are all very used to doing it. All right. We always compete with other entities which are seeking the same resources. And this is a nice management jargon to say. And the simple example is, if you have siblings and you are gunning for that piece of chocolate, then you are fighting for that resource, which is the chocolate, amidst other entities which are your siblings. And therefore, you need to figure out why you should get it from whoever has the authority to give you. And you can extend this logic to all situations where you're looking for a job and there are 10
Yeah,
others who are
yeah,
fighting for that job, and how your interview, you are establishing that you're better than them. You are in a class in college. If you want to be the topper, there are other 10 students who are equally good. What do you need to do? What's your strength? Is your strength studying 10 hours a day, or is your strength perceptionally understanding the topic and therefore doing well? So in every situation, you are used to doing it. It's no different in your career. Okay. Might sound complex and overwhelming, but go back to those basics and someone will be able to find out
okay,
what is the net value I think I can communicate. It may so
excellent.
happen that your colleague, who's another salesperson, is communicating net value in a different way.
Right.
Everything works as long as you're successful.
And from what I understood in the other session on behavioral selling, is the net value is also a function of what the unique identity of that customer is. So she may have the same need, but the way she perceives the net value may be more emotional than rational, or with some other hook. So you also have to be able to customize it to each customer and context. So excellent. So now let's
Very
go.
important, very important point. All salespeople need to keep in mind, institutional sales, whatever the word means, an institution does not buy, an individual buys. That individual is a
Correct.
part of an institution. But here's
Correct.
an individual who's buying, an individual who's selling. If these two people click, the transaction goes through. If they don't click, no matter what your value is, and no matter what their budget is, and everything else, doesn't
Yes.
work.
Unless you are a monopoly and they have to use your service, which is a
Of course,
very
then
which is a
none of
very
that is
rare thing,
required.
a very lucky thing if you can be in that place.
Yeah.
So great. So now let me come back to that other point I wanted to talk to you, is to say that the whole process of the buying selling process, as one may call it, has two components you pointed out. One is called business development, and the other is you called sales. So I think it might probably take a whole day of sessions to cover it in detail. But if you were to quickly again uh, talk to the young sales professional who's listening to you and tell them in a very snapshot what the difference is, or what is the interplay between the two, it will be very nice.
Let me give an analogy. And the analogy is, somebody takes you in front of a huge maze, the great Bhulbulaya, maybe in Lucknow, and say that somewhere inside this maze, somewhere inside this Bhulbulaya, I have kept a gem hidden. It's a piece of diamond which is kept hidden. Your job is to go find the diamond and bring it in. So the process of scoring the entire Bhulbulaya and reaching the diamond is business development, and the process of collecting it and bringing it out by dodging all the guards and everybody else is the process of sales. It's a very crude, simple analogy. Now, what does it mean in the case of institutional sales? Let's say you're a technology salesperson, very complex technology services. So you go to an account client, you expect that this client has a very detailed, complex environment. You think you can add value, and you can add value to your own company as well because these guys are big. You can get great revenue from it. That's when you start the process of business development, building relationships, talking about what you can do, creating value, establishing that net value, etc., etc. And one day the client turns around and says that, okay, I get it, I like it, and I would like to buy, provided you tell me what's your scope of work, you tell me what's your price, you accept the terms, etc., etc. That's when sales takes over. So sales is more focused. Sales is transaction in nature that, okay, here is a transaction which I need to bring home. All right. So my job is not to kind of do, blue skying. All right. My job is not to paint on a canvas. The canvas is already there. I need to go talk to the client on the scope of work. I need to establish and negotiate a price. I need to establish and negotiate the terms of the contract. I need to create a situation where both the parties commit to it, sign on the dotted lines, and bring the transaction home. All right. So sales is putting blinkers on, focusing on with a tunnel vision, all right, and bringing a transaction home. Biz dev is no tunnel vision. It's a broader vision. It's a horizon, all right, and blue sky. So in that blue sky, you're given a canvas. You have to paint on that canvas and create something out of nothing. So that's the difference between these two.
So, so could I paraphrase it in a different analogy and say that,
Sure, please, yes.
when you enter when you're cold calling and when you're still trying to figure out which customer in the market would be interested in your CRM solution, and then you go and figure out who's the right person to talk to in that company, and then go and meet one or two of those people and get into their consideration set in the sense that they are all willing to consider you also in their set of vendors. Could we say till that point it is business development?
And slightly more.
Mm.
They consider you, and of course, we in IBM in those days we used to follow a certain rule, and we used to call it 70-70 rule. Things could have changed, others can follow different rules. That's what we used to follow. And 70-70 rule means that there is a 70% probability that the client is going to do this project. And then there is a 70% probability that the client will do this project with us. That's the 70-70 rule. If it's a tick mark on both these, that's when it
Yeah.
ends, and we bring the sales team in and say, all right,
Yeah.
guys, and now go and get the booty home.
Yeah. Now I can actually relate, and maybe our listeners may also like to know this little interesting anecdote that two of us were in this 70-70 situation, and that's how we met, right? So
Project Ashoka.
you were trying to figure out whether my organization has had the first 70 and the second, but we never went even beyond the first 70 eventually. So the organization didn't want to implement that solution at all, not with a company, but with any company. So I relate very well now to what you said about 70 and 70.
And if you remember, you did not see any salesperson from IBM. You just saw me and my colleague,
Exactly.
white-haired colleague, the great Anand Pradhan.
Yes.
So we were all
Yes.
doing business development
Yes.
work.
And so much so, I wouldn't want to name the person, but uh, uh, the chairman of one of the biggest IT companies in India, one of the doyens, gurus, gods, suddenly appeared in my cabin one day for the same proposition and shocked me out of my wits. So, just to say that sales is part of everybody's life, in not just
Yes.
a person's. So nice that you have separated out and shown how business development and uh, sales how they come together. Uh, I now want to move gears to things that they never taught you in sales school, or uncomfortable questions you cannot ask your boss or your company. Uh, and the example for that, I'll take myself. I shall be self-deprecating and tell you that uh, I was when I was the CEO of a company, and there was a client who was very uh, rich with potential, and they were going to close it. So I was very keen to go along with the team to do it. And mind you, the team was headed by the CEO of that particular downstream company. But I felt so excited and important that I said I must come along with you. And not the CEO, but the head of business in that downstream company actually told me, "Sir, aap mat aiye, don't come, because if you come, you will give away too much." So I had the, you know, uh, I got my lesson, and I didn't. Of course, I did go later after the deal was closed, so that one shows the flag and then the commitment and so on. But they didn't take me for that critical meeting. But they said, if we can earn $100, this guy will be so excited he'll give it away for 90 just because he's like that. The reason I'm telling you this is the reverse. Often young sales professionals, bosses very well know if their team member is not functioning, and they know how to correct them and how to solve that problem. That you don't come for this call, or you come only for these calls. What do I do when I am a young sales professional, and my boss is along with me, and he's not up to the mark, and I can clearly see that he's messing up things. It's a very interesting. It just came to me, when you were talking. Is there? I don't think there's any answer in a very prescriptive way, but maybe you have some thoughts on that.
I've seen it many times, and I've even experienced it with the CEO of the largest tech companies, and I always thought that, look, he's going to mess things up, which he did. And of course, I didn't have any way to change that or control that, because you can't change what you don't control. But the stuff that I used to try is, and especially it sometimes works with very complex environments, is you're not going to do a sales overnight in these situations. It's going to take months, sometimes years. Okay. Uh, and throughout these months of engagement, and if you are seriously genuine, you do end up building and striking a very, very good rapport with the client. All right. And at some point in time, the client equally wants to get the deal done as you do. And that's when, if you have these kind of an environment coming up where a senior exec is coming and uh, wants to technically close a deal, and you know that he might actually give away more than what he should, because obviously he's going to come and meet the CEO of the client, and the client CEO is going to ask for the moon. Now, what do you do? So between the client and yourself, you sit together and create certain boundary conditions for that conversation to happen, that meeting to happen. And he coaches his side, which is his CEO, and you coach your side, which is your CEO, and you simply hope for the best. And many times I have seen it didn't work. It just fell down. That's occupational hazard. You just live with it. Uh, but on your point of what are those difficult questions which people can ask, you can always ask your company, tell me what's the net value. I understand what you're saying is the gross value. Everybody offers these things. What's the net value that you offer over and above your competitors? It's a tough question to ask. Uh, Rookie salespeople will not be able to ask it on day one. They'll probably need 3, 4, 6 months of experience before they can say, I am asking this question because I have seen these things in those 10 circumstances that I was in the last 6 months. Now explain to me what's your net value over and above your competitor. But that's a difficult question, tough question. Uh, you may be surprised that your boss even doesn't know about it, because he's also struggling through the same game. But some of these questions are what you could ask. Remember, no matter what you do, you cannot change what you don't control. As a young salesperson, 95% is outside your control. Live with it, you learn through it, you learn to bypass some of it and and succeed.
So, again, there's no linear. I'm just throwing up things based on how things happen.
Sure.
Most of us don't consciously get into these careers, right? It just happened to us. Uh, we didn't start off in life wanting to be the frontline sales head of a company or whatever. Uh, Maybe it's different now, but even if it was, uh, when you get into this profession, uh, it's very easy to know whether you're good or not, simply because the results speak for themselves, right? You achieved your targets, and you're also comfortable and feel get good about it, or you achieved it but you didn't feel comfortable, so you get a sense that this is for me and this is not for me. uh, in my case, I was very clear. I began my life in consumer sales, and I was never comfortable in institutional sales, because I just did not have that patience that is and the different values required for it. And I always step back from institutional sales processes myself, knowing that I should not get into it. And when I went up the ladder and I was in situations where there was institutional sales, like ad sales, for example, I tried not to get into it personally because there's only so much I can do in terms of the art, not the and the skill, not the science. So in this model, is there a way for people to gauge quickly their place in the sales world? Is there anything that comes to your mind? I know it's not some structured question, just a random thought.
Oh, yes. It's traction. Now, results may not follow, but traction does. And uh, let's say you're in an industry which has a long cycle and you've got the wrong end of the cycle. So for results to come in, and this happens in the institutional side a lot, for results to come in, you will have to wait a very long time. But that's not necessarily true for traction. Traction is that you've gone out, you're talking to 10 clients. What's their response? What's their feedback? Uh, do they run away every time they see your face lurking in the reception? Or do they actually look forward to it? Do they like to have a cup of coffee with you? Do they like to go out for a lunch or a dinner with you? Do they want to have those conversations with you? That's traction. All right. So then you know that you are gaining ground. It takes a lot of time, but you're gaining ground. At the same time, you must constantly judge whether there is traction within yourself, whether every morning you feel like going back to that particular client or another client. Would you like to go to him and say, uh, can we go out for a drink maybe end of the week? That's traction from your side that, look, are you enjoying this? Results are far away, but are you enjoying this? So if both these match, then you know that the traction exists, and therefore there is a very high likelihood you'll succeed. It's a matter of time because you've caught the wrong end, wrong cycle, right? Even if you were in the right cycle, some of these things take a lot of time. If you're in strategic outsourcing, as I was, it takes 2 years for one deal because this deal could be 100, $500 million, $1 billion. The largest that I've done is $1 billion deal. You don't get $1 billion deal in 1.5 years. It took us 2.5, 3 years to crack that $1 billion. So for 3 years, you are at it every day. So even if you're on the positive side of cycle, it could still take time. But traction tells you whether this is something for you or not, and it's true for every job. You could be a teacher, a school, or a professor. Do you like going back to the class? Do you like teaching that math or that science or that history, whatever you're teaching? Or you're a research scientist. Do you like going back to the lab every day? That's that's the first way of assessing whether this is for you or not.
Excellent. That's a traction. Again, I like the way you bring out a word which can encapsulate the whole concept. Let's change tack here and go back to something we discussed before we had this conversation formally, which was to talk where you were suggesting that we should talk about this sales not just being a profession in itself, but being an important skill for other professions, uh, or any role that has stakeholders facing you, whether it's a customer, or whether it's a shareholder, or whether it is voters, and so on, right? So in that, you brought out a very, again, the other side of your, or what is currently the main side of your work, which is entrepreneurship. And you said entrepreneurs first have to be salespeople, because as an entrepreneur, she's all there is to that idea, and she's got to convince people to invest, to buy, to work with her, and to supply her, right? So you that whole arc that you pointed out. Now, my question to you is, or not a question, more a point to clarify, is by nature, it's not necessary she comes from that background. She could be a technocrat. You had pointed it out in our earlier conversation on engineering technocrats. She could be a lawyer starting a law firm. That's also an entrepreneurial venture. She could be anyone. Uh, and typically, her skill sets don't include this whole, formal knowledge, also the science, apart from the art, right, of the whole sales process and the what goes with it. So, what would you say to such people? Is there anything you'd like to offer them as advice?
So let me break this part into three parts. First, sales as a skill. All right. Uh, Way before we even get into sales as a professional skill for this particular profession, sales profession or other professions, sales is a very fundamental skill for life. You sell every day. I took that chocolate example. You are selling to get that chocolate. You are selling when maybe you are in college and you have a crush on that lovely young lady. You know, five other friends have the same crush, but you are selling to her as to why she should spend the rest of her life with you. So you are selling. You are selling to your family as to why they should go to the place that you have chosen for your holiday. It used to happen with me a lot. I love mountains. My daughter used to hate it. And every time we would like to go on a holiday, I would have to sell to her as to why she should visit the next lovely mountain, even if she hates it. Do you understand? Right? So it's a life skill in every aspect. Then let's come to other professions like entrepreneurship. Yes, it's the first most important skill for an entrepreneur to be able to sell her stuff, without which there is no revenue, no value, no success, no validation, no money, no nothing. All the elements of entrepreneurship crashes if you cannot sell. Then the question is, as you said, that not everybody comes with these skills, right? What happens if you are a research scientist and you've come up with something very unique, which could change the world and therefore have huge business potential? You can't sell a dime in your life. What happens then? Believe it or not, yesterday morning, I was in a meeting for about a couple of hours, a very similar situation. You have a research scientist for 30 years who's come up with something very unique in the material science side of it, come out with a product which can change the way satellite communication can work. But he's a research scientist, so can he monetize it? No. So then what do we do? In a nutshell, we say that all right, this is where we call co-founder dating service, which is you become a co-founder, you get a co-founder with complementary skills, somebody who can run a business, somebody who can sell, somebody who can go talk to investors, etc., etc. You get together, good for him, good for you, good for the business, good for the society, everything. All right. So that's another way of doing it. If you don't have those skills, if you're a technopreneur, if you remember in the other meeting we had, I used the word entrepreneur versus technopreneur. If you're a technopreneur and you are very research minded, then this is a solution. The third thing you asked, what about a lawyer? She's a lawyer, she's opened her law firm. What about a doctor? She's a doctor, she's a surgeon, she's got a practice. Thankfully, they don't have to sell, and neither are they allowed to sell by law.
Yeah, I
Uh,
meant
you
more
know,
that they start an affiliate business in, online solutions for something, or they want to create a medical technology business of that kind, not their own practice. So just to clarify.
right. So, uh, in some of these cases, even if you do not wish to have a co-founder, there are external agencies who help it. You know, a person like me would do these kind of services for people as well, who come up with very interesting things, but not necessarily have the mindset to go out and sell. And then that's required, because if everybody really does all this, then who's going to create stuff? You need people who would
Yeah.
also create this lovely stuff. So there are different solutions available, but I still maintain that sales is a very fundamental life skill. And even if you are not professionally attuned to selling in your personal life, at some point in time, you would have sold.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I would in fact go one step further and recommend to somebody who's not exposed to this process to actually formally get trained, and there are enough, at least understand the basics of how to
Yes.
open conversation, and how to close it, and what are the
Yes. Of
cues, and
course.
how to prepare for it, and so on. I think like preparation. So great. So we've covered many interesting aspects of this wonderful profession, or this wonderful skill set, or whichever way you want to call it, which is sales. So I thought we should sort of conclude now, and I would like to throw it open to you if you had, some last, what do you call, free shots to play, or you had any two
Sure.
or three points you wanted to
Sure.
leave behind as to people, if nothing else.
It's, I'll just highlight one point. One, it's a great profession because if you look at, if you want to be a professional, an executive, pretty much all companies, the CEOs happen to come from sales and marketing, right? So if you have the aspirations and ambitions, you should, to reach the top of any corporation that you want to work with in any industry, this is the profession, because this is the way to the top. That's number
Correct.
one. Second, if you're connected to the market, which as salespeople you do, then you can take a step in entrepreneurship. That's a parallel opportunity which will open up for you, and you can create more value for the society, yourself, and everybody else in that. Again, sales comes and helps there. Uh, it also helps you open up your mind, open up your horizon, because you meet different people, you hear different perspectives, you understand what is going on. Uh, you always scourge the whole world for what's new, what's the greatest and the newest things which is happening. So all of these help in character building as well. So it has many, many, many advantages. It has its problems as well. Whether it's raining, it's hot and humid and dusty and polluted, you are walking the streets. Uh, but that's how it is. Uh, think of it positively; it just keeps you fit. So that's where I would say that it's a great career and people should very seriously look at it and make the best of it.
I second that, and based on my personal life experience, and probably you may also concur with that, that if nothing else, in today's world where it's a bit unstable, you don't know whether your job will remain, your company will remain, the industry you work in will remain. Things are very, whether it's bani, buka, whatever word salad you want to use, things are not stable. So in that situation, I believe if you can build these capabilities mildly and sensibly, if nothing else, you can be self-employed in some way. You don't have to be relying on someone else. And even in this, you can at least have a measure of reassurance that if nothing else, I can, use my own skill sets to manage, to generate some income. And to do that, I have the ability to convince people to give me that money for the service that I provide. So I would urge, this is not just to young sales professionals, I would say this is to all young people and even some not so young people, that consider this this vital skills, life skill called sales and selling, and make the most of it. So, Hirak, thank you again, as usual, for your kindness,
Pleasure.
and it's always nice talking to you because you bring out keywords like traction, which which one remembers. So today you covered quite a few interesting facets, starting with the sense of being overwhelmed and how young people should come out of it, and then we talked about how to work with your bosses, and work with, and then we separated business development and sales and looked at that, and we talked in the end about how sales is a life skill, and entrepreneurs and pretty much anyone who's self-employed or even in your own life to make life better. So that was a pretty good, around the world in 60 minutes with you. And like we did the last time, I hope we'll soon come back and talk about some other interesting aspect of work life, if I may call it. And have a nice weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. And thank you very much for having me here as well.